Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of The Art of Photography. My name is Ted Forbes. Today we are talking about GTD for photographers. Now what is GTD? GTD stands simply for Getting Things Done. And Getting Things Done is a book that came out a few years ago that really changed my life by a guy named David Allen. And I don't actually have a copy of the book here. I gave it to my brother-in-law, but I've got an iPad version and an audio version, and I really recommend this. If you go to theartofphotography.tv, if you're not already watching there, I'll put this link in the show notes to the book. Highly recommended. David Allen, GTD is his system for basically productivity and organization. And there have been a number of these over the years. And for me, it was a life changer because I'm very disorganized in general by nature, and I'm all over the map. I tend to be very productive, but I have to work hard at both of those things, at being organized and being productive. And GTD is a system that really helped me get a lot of that organized. Back in the 90s, I did the Franklin Covey system, and a lot of these are fine. They're good systems, but the problem that I had is that they were usually kind of complicated, and if I fell off the wagon, so to speak, and I became disorganized and I wasn't using the system, it was really hard to get back on. And that's one thing I really like about David Allen's method, is that it's a very easy system to get back into. I will say now, it's way beyond the scope of this podcast to tell you everything about GTD. He's written an entire book on it. Even though it's a very simple system, he has a lot of things to say about it. And this is, as far as I'm concerned, essential reading. I know it's not a photography book, but I think in terms of personal productivity, and this is where I wanted to tie it in with photography, it's always been interesting for me, at least in the last couple of years that I've been aware of GTD and tried to practice it myself, is how people who are creative-minded get into this. And this is probably more than just a podcast of me lecturing to you, because I don't claim to be an expert or a teacher on GTD. It's just something I'm a big student and a fan of, and I'm constantly working on. And I would be interested to hear what other people who watch the podcast, perhaps there's some of you out there who are GTDers, would have to say about this. And let me set this up by saying, a lot of times, as you know, with creative work, it's hard to just come up with a system where there's a to-do list for a lot of what we do. As a photographer, you need to allow time to experiment with things. You need to allow time to become inspired by things, to set goals, and you need to be given the freedom to fail at things. GTD allows for all this, but all these systems essentially boil down to a checklist or a to-do list. And sometimes being creative isn't necessarily as easy as a to-do item. Like come up with new idea. Well, that's going to be a hard thing to do. That is more of a project that you've got to kind of realize. But one thing that I can cover in this podcast that I wanted to talk about, if you're not familiar with GTD, is David Allen has this way of looking at things. He has this metaphor where he uses an airplane taking off of a runway. And bear with me, it makes sense. If you're on the ground level, you're about to take off in your airplane, you can see, you're probably moving fast, you see all the details that are on the landscape. You see the airport, you see the runway, you see whatever is involved. You see this cat behind me I'm not going to retake this because this is take 4. But anyway, everybody say hello to Zeter, he's my buddy. So you're on the runway level. Let's try and stay focused here. GTD, and I'm already distracted. You're on the runway level, you see things moving quickly, you see all the details, but you don't see the bigger picture. When you get up to the 15,000 foot level, you know, the plane's taking off, you start to see less details and you start to see more of your surroundings. Maybe you see landmarks, you start to see where you are in the larger scheme of things. And then finally, when you're at the 30,000 foot level, as David Allen explains, you're at a level where you can see really the big picture. And this really boils down to way beyond your career, what your hobbies are. These are things that, like, you know, this large level of what you want to do with your life, what makes you happy, how important are things like family, where you live, you know, those kinds of things. And I think that's really big. So you can see that all these levels, and that's where I think this analogy to this airplane metaphor comes in, is I think it's really easy for photographers especially, but really for any artist. You know, you're on that runway level all the time. You're in the heat of the battle. You're seeing the details, and that's what you're paying attention to. Particularly people, if you're doing post-production, you're, you know, concentrating on a photo and trying to get the levels to look right and the colors to look right and really do all your post. And that's not a bigger picture level. And sometimes we want, as photographers, to aspire to greater things, and that kind of thing comes a lot more slowly to us. The reason I wanted to talk about this today is right around Christmas I did a podcast called Remarkable. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And I was trying to be inspiring on there. I will admit that I was, you know, trying to feel inspired myself in doing that. And a lot of times I talk about things like getting better as a photographer or being remarkable. And these are all wonderful things, but they're very vague terms. Like, what does it mean to be remarkable? And the thing is I can't tell you what that means, because it means one thing to me, it probably means something different to you. Being a good photographer means something to me that isn't necessarily the same as what it means to you. So these aren't things that I can like just give you an easy answer to. But what I can do, and I do this with my college students, is try to get you to think about it and try to get you to open up and, you know, kind of accept some of those things and really make them part of your routine. And that's where I think GTD is very interesting. Not only will it personally make you more productive if you forget little things all the time, you know, it's a system for getting all that into one place, but also remembering David Allen's analogy of this airplane thing, being able to see your life on different levels. And when you're at the ground level and you're moving quickly, you really are not able to look at what remarkable means necessarily. I think you can get remarkable details in there, but the bigger picture of remarkable is going to be a lot different. And I think that's what's difficult, you know, as a photographer to try to deal with. Things like that and doing a podcast with a cat that shows up are both very difficult, which has nothing to do with GTD. But anyway, I wanted to get you guys thinking in terms of that. I'm really interested to see what other people think, because I think getting creative work, or people that do creative work, particularly if you do it for a living, there is, you know, kind of this side of it that's really hard to predict. And I think that's the biggest challenge for people who do creative work. These are people, you know, not just photographers, designers, you know, illustrators, artists, anybody who does something that requires creative thinking. You have to treat things differently than somebody who has their work a little more laid out for them in next step actions all the time. And so it's really important to remember those things. There is a whole community of people on the internet that are really into GTD. That's kind of how I came across it. And I'll post some links to some of those things too. Follow me on Twitter. I post a lot of that stuff. If something's helpful to me, I like to share it with others. So, and I post a lot on GTD and creativity and all that stuff. So anyway, I would love to get people's feedback on this. And I think it's too premature now, but one day I would like to do a masterclass live on this, because I think this is a huge subject. But I'd like to get people's feedback and get some information from others and do a little more research before I do something like that. But anyway, all that to say, you know, I think it opens a discussion. So, you know, feel free to join the Flickr group. It's flickr.com/groups/art of photography. No just art of photography. And, you know, you can sign up and we'll put a posting in there, and maybe we can start discussing some of these things and find out what works for people. I think it's very important, all these things to consider, because, you know, you're trying to make something that's very vague and nebulous very defined. And that is a big challenge, and I think we all have it. Once you can start to define those things, then you can turn that into what David Allen calls next step actions, which are little things that can keep the project moving, things that you can do in under a couple minutes. You know, like, you know, call my friend and invite him over because I'm going to shoot his portrait, you know, if your bigger picture is trying to do portraits, for instance. And so, you know, these bigger items of what it means to be a better photographer, what it means to be remarkable, you know, think about some of the things that on a large scale you want to move towards. And I think it's important to devote time to thinking about those. I'll give you an example. It's changed a little bit, but you know, early on when I was starting out, one of the photographers who really inspired me was Steve McCurry, who is a very famous National Geographic photographer. And Steve is amazing. His most famous picture is the Afghan girl. He shot in Afghanistan, obviously, but and there was a whole thing with that. But she has these very striking eyes, and it was this famous Kodachrome, because the way the colors saturated was very, you know, Kodak used it as a big poster image for a long time. But I was very influenced by Steve McCurry's work, and it's one thing. You know, I live in Texas, and I don't live in an exotic location, but, you know, here's a guy who inspires me. Well, I think it's important to start analyzing what is it about that person's work, whoever that is for you, that inspires you. I mean, he has a brilliant use of color. Well, I shoot a lot of black and white, so, you know, I mean, I'm not going to mimic that, but, you know, there's the use of color, there's the exotic locations of it, there's the expressions on people's faces that he gets in very natural portraits that are unconventional in the sense that they usually are portraying an emotion that's not necessarily somebody smiling in front of a camera, like the Afghan girl, for instance, and there's a million others that he shot. And, you know, I'm not saying go copy somebody, but I'm saying go define what it is about their work that does influence you and what makes it great to you. Why do I think he's one of the greats? That is a little bit more of a broad example because he's very famous, but maybe there's somebody that there's an aspect of their work you really like. And it's important to really start thinking about that in a bigger picture term and start thinking about how can I, if I want to move towards some of that, you know, let's say it's the exotic location stuff. Well, you know, for instance, for me, I live in Texas, and, you know, for me, I need to start getting out of Texas and try and find at least some vacation time and some money set aside to go somewhere and really get into shooting on a location. So, I mean, that's just an example, you know, so that could be a project. So anyway, so I think that's the thing, is go determine who those people are for you and use GTD and kind of some of this, you various altitude levels of thinking to kind of really try to get your head around that and become inspired and define what remarkable is. So anyway, once again, this has been The Art of Photography, and thank you for watching.